Here's my problem with systemic racism as a phrase. There is universal racism. To imagine that it's systemic limits it to, well, it's in some situations. It's not in some situations. It's in every situation in which there are people. If you replaced your system today with a new system, it would be just as racist, because all the people in it are racist. The conversation is strategy. If you raise a kid to think that racism is going to hold them back, do you get the same result as if you raise them to say, oh, racism's everywhere? You're going to slice through that like it didn't exist. Which one of them gets you a better result overall? Every kid is different, but overall. It's not even close. And we know this. We know it completely. We know that telling somebody that they will be held back will hold them back. And we know that telling people that they're not limited by the problems in life. The problems are real, but you're not limited by them. There's nothing that makes that have to affect you. In fact, the existence of racism necessarily creates strategic advantages. Necessarily. There are lots of ways to deal with problems with your system, and I'm all for it. But calling it systemic racism as the unifying principle is misleading and ultimately racist, actually, unintentionally. So, in my ongoing effort to get canceled, I tweeted today that systemic racism is a manipulation term which I reject. Now, of course, I accept that Black Lives Matter. Of course. Now, just so that I can be part of the conversation without distraction, I always like to tack that on first. Because if you say it directly, and you say it first, and I would recommend my technique, comma, of course. Because if you don't add the of course, you leave some suggestion that maybe you just arrived at that opinion or something. It's like, well, yesterday I wasn't so sure, but today, yeah, now that I think about it, Black Lives Matter. So, comma, of course, I like to add that to eliminate, what are we even talking about? Like, why would you even ask me that dumb fuck question? Of course. But here's my problem with systemic racism as a phrase. In my views, racism is universal and pervasive, and it's in all things everywhere, wherever there are humans. So since humans are pattern recognition machines, but they're not good at it, they're subject to confirmation bias, they don't have the full story most of the time, we just don't. So wherever there are humans, there is something like bias. You could call it racism, but there's always bias. And so the fact that it also exists in systems doesn't add as much to your understanding as you would hope. So the first problem with systemic racism as a phrase is that it's a manipulation phrase. It's a phrase of influence. It's a phrase of persuasion, which is different from a solution-oriented description. So I've been pushing back on that phrase because my problem with it is it doesn't suggest solutions, and in fact it kind of makes you look away from where they might be. So it is a very subtle manipulation because it suggests the solution where it really shouldn't. So in other words, it moves you past the sale into where you should be looking for a solution, but you really need to be back on the sale. You need to be looking a little deeper. That's my problem with it. Let me say more about that. The problem is that if you say there's systemic racism, the second part of that usually is that it's a ripple effect from slavery. Now, I don't believe there's anybody who would argue that the legacy of slavery did not have a ripple effect, a strong one, into the future and the current, that disadvantages or has disadvantaged the black community. There's nobody who argues that, right? the legacy of slavery. Because what was it, Chappelle, who was saying that his great, I forget how many greats, but somebody that he knew in his lifetime, I think, came from slavery. So it wasn't that long ago. So it's not that hard to imagine. In fact, it's obvious that there's an economic ripple effect. But here's my problem with framing it that way. Let's say you got two kids. One has an unlucky history, and now he's a poor kid today. He has all the disadvantages of poor kids today. Now, none of this was his fault. He had nothing to do with his grandfather or he wasn't even born. He had nothing to do with choices they made. He just ended up here. Then there's another kid, also an unlucky history, but let's say it's a different kind of unlucky history. But he wasn't there. The kid wasn't even born. It's people who came before him and did other things. And now he's a poor kid. Now you got two poor kids. Which one gets the reparations? Which one gets the reparations? Because here's the thing. It doesn't matter why you got there. And the systemic racism argument, it's got lots of features to it, but one of the main features is that it implies a solution. And that is persuasion. Because the solution is implied in the framing of the situation. If you were to frame it differently, your solution would look different. Here's how you would frame it differently if you were solution-oriented. You would say, does it matter how these kids got here? What's the difference how they got here? Like, I wasn't a slave owner. I didn't cause this kid to be poor. I had nothing to do with it. It doesn't matter that his parents were, drug addicts and grandparents were criminals or whatever happened. It had nothing to do with this kid. This kid was just born. That's all they did. They were just born. Which one is the favored one? Which one do we want to put our attention on? I would say that it would be unambiguously racist to say that the one who came from a specific kind of history gets more help, whatever that looks like, reparations, funding in the government, whatever that looks like. That would be purely racist to say that this person had one kind of history that got him to this situation, this had another kind, and coincidentally, all the ones that are like this are the same color. That is racist by definition. So systemic racism, I don't know if it was created for this purpose, but it has the quality of making you think past the details all the way to the solution. If you don't study persuasion, it's not as obvious that it's a persuasion term and not a descriptive term. So, let me say this. Those who say there is systemic racism, I say to you, you're thinking small. There is universal racism. To imagine that it's systemic limits it to, it's in some situations. It's not in some situations. It's in every situation in which there are people. If you replaced your system today with a new system, it would be just as racist, because all the people in it are racist, and it doesn't matter who they are. We are pattern recognition machines, but we're not good at it. So we're biased about everything, all the time, right? It's just the human condition. We try to overcome it with laws and rules, and we tweak them, and we fix them, and we study them, and we try to use our higher sense of reason for those who have a religious upbringing, maybe a higher moral sense. But we can fight pretty hard to overcome our biases, but we can't get rid of them. So let's be realistic about what can and cannot happen. And I think we're just better off if we say, God, I'm just so biased. You've seen this several times, haven't you? How many African American people have you heard in your personal life or in the media say something like this? I prefer the racists who are just tell me they're racist. The ones who bother me are the suburban soccer mom who pretends she's not, but is. Right? How many black people have you heard say that either in public or privately to you? It's fairly common, right? It's like, I can deal with honesty. I can deal with honesty. It's actually simple to deal with. Oh, you've got this feeling? Well, good for you. I'll go over here because I'd rather be with people who don't feel like that. Or, how about you're an idiot, Bob? How about, Bob, you're an idiot because you're a bigot and I've got a PhD. So, that's great for you, Bob, being a bigot. How's your GED? Because I got a PhD. Imagining there's a black guy talking to Bob. So you should be able to just laugh about it and kind of deal with it as a human condition that you're trying as hard as you can to use your better senses to overcome. But as soon as you start saying, well, I don't have any racism, I'm a good suburban mom, well, what do you do with that, right? What do you do with that? If you can't talk about it, call it out, joke about it, complain about it, do something about it, try something, do something different, you're tying yourself in knots. So, there's my stand. And I will even go further. You want me to take it to full cancellation? Here it goes. Full cancellation for Scott. Possibly the last time you'll ever experience coffee with Scott Adams, unless I'm hiding somewhere in the the witness protection program. Here it comes. I think it's child abuse to tell a young person there is systemic racism. I think it's child abuse to tell young black kids, or any kids, that there's systemic racism, even if there is. Now, if you're going to argue, but Scott, there is systemic racism, I'm not arguing that. You can call it whatever you want. I've already said it's universal. Universal is much bigger than your little complaint about systemic. If you're going to go small, but, that's on you. I'm going big. I'm saying everybody's a racist all the time, in every system, all the time. You're saying there's this little systemic racism thing that's a component of that, and okay, but I'd rather see the big picture, not the small picture. Here's my point. We have science which seems to clearly indicate that people respond to other people's expectations. We know, for example, that if you do an experiment in which you randomly choose small kids and you say, hey, you small kids, you're the gifted ones, you're the smart ones, and we're going to put you in a special class. Randomly chosen. They are not the smart ones. Literally randomly chosen. Track them from a year, their grades will be better. It's pretty consistent. It can be reproduced. You tell kids they're smart, they act smart. They rise to their expectations. You tell kids that they're not smart, and they will lower to that expectation. Kids need to be told what they can and can't do, and you tell them. You tell them directly, you tell them indirectly, but they're hearing it. What can I do? What does a kid know? A kid doesn't know what they can do, doesn't know what they'll someday be able to do. They have no idea until they can do it. So I would say that telling kids that there is systemic racism and there's this hard to describe force, imagine you're a kid, you don't quite know what all of it even means. If you tell them that, you're telling them your life is going to be suppressed. You've got this force working against you. Now again, if you're just joining me, I'm not saying whether the racism will hold people back or not. Obviously, it's a negative. I'm not arguing that it exists or doesn't exist or it's bad or what. So that's not even part of the conversation. The conversation is strategy. That whether it exists or doesn't exist, what do you tell the kid? All right, how about this? You've got some horrible problem in your life, you're an adult. It's just like a horrible problem. Do you tell a small kid? No. It doesn't matter if it's true. There are things you tell kids, and there are things you just don't tell kids. It doesn't matter if it's true. That's not how you manage children, because they don't have, obviously developed brains. So if you raise a kid to think that racism is going to hold them back, do you get the same result as if you raise them to say, oh, racism's everywhere? You're going to slice through that like it didn't exist. Which one of them gets you a better result overall? Every kid is different, but overall, it's not even close. And we know this. We know it completely. We know that telling somebody that they will be held back will hold them back. And we know that telling people that they're not limited by the problems in life. The problems are real, but you're not limited by them. There's nothing that makes that have to affect you. In fact, the existence of racism necessarily creates strategic advantages. Necessarily. All right? Let me say more about that. If racism did not exist, could a black person walk into any Fortune 500 company and be almost guaranteed a job, so long as they have basic qualifications that are, comparable to other people applying for the job? No, they couldn't. They could not. If racism did not exist, could a poor black kid be pretty much guaranteed a college scholarship, so long as they get good enough grades? Probably not. Probably not. So if you're a poor black kid born into a family that says, look, here's the deal. Racism is everywhere. You're not going to be able to fix that. But here's the cool part. Because racism is everywhere, it opens up these, lesser, but still perfectly acceptable, lesser in terms of number, channels for you to succeed. And it's basically, it's a superhighway. Get out of the forest, walk over to this superhighway that says free college, and you're going to get a good job. And your life is going to look pretty good. Just walk over here. Here's the strategy that works. Over there, there's a strategy that doesn't work. Does racism exist? Yeah. It's everywhere. Won't affect you a bit. I mean, it'll affect you in your social life and how you feel about things. It'll affect you that way. It's not going to stop your income. It's not going to stop you from getting married. Not going to stop you from having a good life. Not going to stop you from buying a house. Maybe there'll be a little discrimination. It's everywhere. So, maybe you get turned down for an apartment and you don't know why. Yeah, that's going to happen because racism's everywhere. But is there another apartment? Yeah. It wasn't like there was one apartment. It's not like you would be turned down so many times that you couldn't get a place. You probably hardly notice it. So imagine, if you will, the two approaches to a kid. Yes, this thing will hold you back, or no, you have strategies that will slice through it like it didn't exist. And in fact, you can use it like judo. You can take the energy of it and use it in your advantage. One of them is child abuse, and one of them is good mentoring. Let me ask you this. You're an employer. Two candidates come in for a job. One of them believes that systemic racism exists and has been a big problem in their life. One of them believes that racism exists everywhere. It's just everywhere. But that this candidate, he or she, has good strategies to overcome it or slice through it. Which one do you hire? Do you hire someone who believes that they're under the yoke of systemic racism, and then you bring them into your company? How's that going to work out? How's that going to work out for you as an employer? Nothing to do with being black. Nothing to do with being black. It's not a race question. If you bring me an employee who believes the system is screwing them, I don't want to be anywhere near that employee. That employee is going to sue you. They're already primed. They're primed for it. Do you think confirmation bias will stop working the day you hire this person? No, the person who believes that systemic racism is the, sort of an organizing model of their world is going to see it everywhere. And they're telling you. They're telling you directly, I believe there is systemic racism, so sure they're going to see it. They're going to see it where it exists, and also where it doesn't. And not because they're black, not because anything, they're just people. The human condition is that confirmation bias affects all of us all the time. You're not immune from it, nobody is. So if you have somebody who has a framework in their head, then they should expect that confirmation bias will fill in the framework, and you're basically just asking yourself to get sued down the road. So keep that in mind if you go looking for a job. I don't think you want anything on your social media history that says you believe systemic racism is holding you back. Now, if you were a white person and you said systemic racism is bad, it probably wouldn't hurt you for a job interview. It might help you, right? I mean, maybe if you had a person of color who was interviewing you, they'd look at that and say, oh, there's an open-minded person. I'll hire them. But if you're black and you come into a job interview with a black employer, how about this? It's a black hiring manager and a black candidate. And one of the candidates, actually, let's say all three of them are black, just to keep it easy. 2 black candidates and 1 black hiring manager. And one of the candidates says systemic racism is a problem in their life, and the other one says, well, racism's everywhere, but it's not bothering me. You know, who do you hire? I mean, it's a no-brainer. All right. Let's see. The other thing that systemic racism does is that it forces you to look in one place for solutions, doesn't it? So what do Republicans say is the problem with the black community? I'm not a Republican, so I'm just summarizing those views. I think most of them would say that if you get the family unit right, then other things work out. I feel that's a little simplistic, all right? So I'm not on board with the strong family unit is the secret to success, because I think that only works for some people in some situations, and when it does, it works great. I'm very jealous of anybody who can, make the strong family unit work. So it makes sense that people who have made it work for themselves and their friends, they would say, hey, this worked for us, you should try it. I just don't think it translates into every situation. So maybe you need something better. But here's the thing. If you say systemic racism is the organizing thing that you're working on, where do you look for your solutions? At the system, right? If you think that systemic racism is the problem, you would look at the systems, because it manipulates you to look past the question of where the problem is and where's the best place to fix it. It makes you think past that to, which systems are we working on? Right? So that's why it's manipulative, and it's a persuasion term. It's not a helpful term. It's not a problem-solving term. It's a political term that's intended to get your emotions up, and I don't know if it's intended, but it makes you look in the wrong place. And what I say by the wrong place is one place in particular. Maybe it's not the wrong place, it forces you to look in one place. I would rather say, what could you do with, let's say, schools and families and early education and stuff? Because wouldn't you say that by the time the kid is 18, it doesn't matter what the other systems are doing, he's in trouble? If the entire problem is caused by the time the kid graduates high school or drops out of high school, if all of the problems are baked into that person by that point, in other words, they didn't get the education, and then they've got a jail record, or whatever it is, they're on drugs, of course that's going to ripple into the future. There's nothing you could do fixing the system that's going to fix any of that. So I feel that calling it systemic racism makes you look away from the first 18 years of life, even though the school is a system, but you don't see people talk about that as much, right? School's a system, your early family life's a system, but that's not what they're talking about, is it? Of course the schools are worse in the inner cities, and I do think that needs to be fixed. But systemic racism makes you look in the wrong place. That said, as I said before, the one place it just stands out is in the justice system. It really stands out there. And I think that if you say, hey, the justice system is creating these unequal outcomes, what do we do about that? I would say, oh, that's worth looking into. Nobody wants unequal outcomes. There's nobody has that as an objective. So if you say we're not getting equal outcomes, in theory, you have every white person in the world on your side on day one. Hey, look at this, unequal outcomes. What white person says, oh, that's the way I wanted it. I wanted it to be unequal outcomes. Nobody. 0 people have that opinion. So if there's a statistical, measurable problem, yeah, you got all the help in the world fixing that. And I've suggested, for example, that if you have unequal outcomes in the justice system, then maybe there was a way to anonymize the information that the judge used, give that to some independent people who can't tell the race or ethnicity of the person involved, and just have them see, hey, wait a minute, this decision is on a line with the average, even considering all the extenuating circumstances and the prison record of the person, etc. Then maybe you could get rid of racism if some way you could anonymize it and have an external people, bring things back to the norm. So there are lots of ways to deal with problems with your system, and I'm all for it. But calling it systemic racism as the unifying principle is misleading and ultimately racist, actually, unintentionally.